Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the 1001 Movies podcast. This time I'll be talking about the 1935 Hollywood classic blockbuster Mutiny on the Bounty, directed by Frank Lloyd.
Sailing orders? Tahiti direct by Cape Horn.
Winds permitting. Of course, if we can't make westing, we shall have to turn around and go back by Africa. In that case, we shall have to put in for supplies at Simon's Bay.
We'll need them. This ship has worse food and less of it than a prison hulk. And that clerk of yours, I'm sorry, but I don't trust him.
Who asked you to meddle with my clerk and his supplies?
You can't get much from a man with a lank belly. I have to work these men we feed, you know.
Men, rascals, and pirates. Did you see them growl at the flogging? I'll teach them what flogging's like.
My advice, sir, if you'll take it, is not to be too harsh with them. We're sailing 10,000 miles, locked up together on this ship for the next 2 years. It's like a powder magazine.
I don't want your advice. I wave my own with seamen. They respect but one law, the law of fear, and it'll be well for my officers to remember
Well,
that.
I can only tell you what I think. These men may come from jails and taverns, but they're Englishmen, and they'll sail this ship anywhere.
I'm not interested in what you think. I expect you to carry out whatever orders I give, whenever I give them.
I'll carry out your orders, Mr. Bligh.
Then we understand each other.
Perfectly.
The opening credits of Mutiny on the Bounty state that it's based on the books by Charles Nordhoff and James Norman Hall, and I, knowing pretty much nothing about the story other than it was about a mutiny in a ship called the Bounty, assumed it was an adaptation of a classic novel. Much to my surprise, I later learned that the story is based on actual facts, and this classic film is actually the third in a series of adaptations for the big screen. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the picture and assume you know what it's about, seamen go on voyage, the captain is mean to them, they mutiny, and that's the end. Let me try to recap it as quickly as possible, and yes, there are spoilers ahead. Captain Bligh, played by Charles Laughton, known for his short temper and affinity for discipline, heads a ship of sailors for a 2-year round-trip journey from England to Tahiti, which is just east of Australia. The other prominent member of the crew is Fletcher Christian, played by Clark Gable, the first mate, or master's mate, which was the proper term at the time. On the trip to Tahiti, the crew is subjected to a number of episodes in which Bligh asserts his authority through cruel and overhanded discipline. He makes his crew watch as he flogs a dead body, he forces a crew member to sit atop the highest mast during a dangerous storm, he keel hauls a man to death after he asks for water because his knees are bleeding from scrubbing the deck, and Bligh pretty much uses any excuse he can to flog any of his crew. When the Bounty arrives in Tahiti, the all-male crew is consumed by their newfound but short-lived freedom, and several of them fall in love with some of the native girls. Not long after the Bounty leaves Tahiti, Fletcher Christian leads a mutiny and forces Captain Bligh and a handful of followers aboard a rowboat with a limited supply of food and water. The mutineers return to Tahiti, where they live happy and simple lives on the tropical island. Bligh's fate remains a mystery until an English ship appears in the island's horizon, and a small handful of the mutineers, some of which were loyal to Bligh and stayed on board the Bounty by accident, allow themselves to be rescued. Christian and the others, however, enjoying their island life and fearing prosecution for mutiny in England, flee the island aboard the Bounty and live happily ever after. The quote-unquote rescued mutineers, however, are brought back to England and put on trial. Only one of them, Roger Byam, escaped death when he was pardoned by the king. Now, although the movie doesn't show us this, the remaining men were all hanged. Now, that's a pretty long synopsis for a movie on this podcast, and it's my longest one so far, but it's important for you to know because it really conveys the epic breadth of this film. In 1935, studios were used to filming pictures on small lots with very little location work. For Mutiny on the Bounty, however, entire replicas of ships were built, and the cast and crew literally traveled across the globe and allegedly enlisted the help of 2,500 Tahitians to play extras. With a running time over 2 hours, it was the biggest epic of its time. Gone with the Wind wouldn't be released for another 4 years, and it cost MGM a whopping, wait for it, $2 million to make. Epic intensity aside, the studio also hired several members of Hollywood royalty to star in the picture. Clark Gable had just come off winning an Oscar for Frank Capra's It Happened One Night, and Charles Laughton had made a career playing pompous and frightening figures in films such as The Barretts of Wimpole Street, Island of Lost Souls, and The Private Life of Henry VIII. Look real hard and you can also spot James Cagney and David Niven as extras. Director Frank Lloyd is now more or less an unknown, but he was a Scotsman who traveled the United Kingdom as a boy with his father, who was a naval engineer. Lloyd's love of ships and the sea made him suitable for the project, and he had previously made such films as The Seahawk, The Eagle of the Sea, and Cavalcade, as well as directing and acting in dozens of silent shorts in the early 1900s. Mutiny on the Bounty couldn't have come at a better time for American moviegoers. It appeared in the midst of one of the worst economic depressions in history, and the relationship between Bligh and Christian was a metaphor for what we would now call the 1% and the other 99%. If it had been made today, it would have been swept under the rug as yet another historical biopic, probably with extensive CGI and high-priced actors. However, with the help of MGM's money, Lloyd and his crew were able to perfectly embody life at sea like no other film had before. The film was nominated for 8 Oscars, including Charles Laughton, Clark Gable, and Franchot Tone for Best Actor. All 3 seemed to cancel each other out, as the award went to Victor McLaglen for The Informer. The next year, the Academy created the Best Supporting Actor and Actress categories so that actors with smaller parts, such as Franchot Tone as Roger Byam, could have a better chance. Mutiny on the Bounty only won 1 Oscar that year, and that was for Best Picture. As of this recording, it remains the last Best Picture winner to have won just that single accolade. Now, I mentioned earlier that this was the 3rd rendition of the story as a movie, and there were more to come. In 1962, it would be made again, this time with Marlon Brando as Christian and Trevor Howard as Bligh. This seems to be the most popular version. It was made again in 1984, simply entitled The Bounty, with Mel Gibson as Christian and Anthony Hopkins as Bligh. Now, I'd be curious to make a comparison of all the films, along with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. It's one of the stories that seems to have been remade the most for the big screen. What did I think of it? Where do I start? Obviously, as classic Hollywood fare goes, it's top-notch. This is the 3rd film from that era I have talked about, and it was apparently a golden age for Hollywood. Then again, if you're going to compile a list of 1001 movies for a book from the last 100 years or so, the older films would have to have some major staying power. The production quality is excellent, as well as the acting, especially Charles Laughton as the sneering and despicable Captain Bligh. Now, I have 2 complaints, though. The bigger one being that the film lags terribly once the crew lands in Tahiti. For half an hour, we're treated to Christian and Byam staring at Tahitian girls and the crew making attempts to jump into the local culture. It all seemed a little forced, but is nevertheless crucial to the plot as it provided the motivation for the mutineers to return to Tahiti. Fun fact, MGM refused to allow any of the actors, men and women, to show their navels. As a result, it looks like everyone's trousers are hiked up uncomfortably in the scenes on the island. The other minor niggle I have is the amount of American actors playing Englishmen who make no attempt at all at an English accent. I realize this shouldn't be important, but it kept pulling me out of the story. The irony nowadays is that so many English actors are playing American roles. Maybe it's karma. That's all I have to say about Mutiny on the Bounty. Tune in next time when I talk about the 1972 Hungarian film Red Psalm, directed by Miklos Youngcho. Feel free to email me at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, and look for the podcast's new page on Facebook. And once again, I'm pimping myself out for some of that positive feedback on iTunes. Until next time, happy viewing.